Sponsored by McCams, getting you back on two wheels when it wasn't your fault.
Well, it was logical to assume that there was always going to be a naked version of the H2 and H2R after that bike mic dropped its way onto the scene 6 years ago. Saying the words naked, supercharged and 1000cc isn't getting any easier to say. This is the Kawasaki Z H2. Quick bit of husbandry before we get cracking with the review. Apologies, or no apologies, for these Scram Kojak spec sunglasses. It's mega sunny out here in this desert Fire State Valley Park, about an hour up the road from Vegas. The other thing is the target market for this bike apparently is a 40-year-old male that likes performance motorcycles. I'm 40 years old today, I fit the bill. So we'll quickly whip through what this bike is from front to back and then I'll give you my riding impression. Now, first things first, tyres. After my Z900 review a couple of weeks ago, I had a bit of a gripe about the OE Dunlops. For some reason, on ZH2, Kawasaki has opted for the Pirelli. It's the Diablo Rosso 3. Not only does it suit the nature of the bike, but for this rider, just the state of mind that I'm in before I get on the bike, knowing that it's a Pirelli rather than an OE Dunlop is a good thing. Moving up from those Pirelli tyres, we've got a Brembo M432 caliper, matched for the first time, I think, ever in my experience with a Nissan master cylinder rather than a Brembo one. What Kawasaki are trying to achieve with that is the braking performance they demand from a Brembo, but with the lever feel and consistency that they feel they get better with Nissan. In between lever and caliper, we've got a Showa separate function big piston fork, stacks of adjustment. We'll get to my riding impression down the line, but that coupled with the Showa gas cartridge shock at the back is a perfect package for a bike like this. In between those forks, we've got a TFT dash, much like Z900. It's a fairly common theme across the premium Kawasaki's that are available now. It's a great screen, very easy to read in low and highlight. It actually auto adjusts for that. And the level of detail that you can go into and set up everything that you can see and personalize it for yourself is quite cool. You know, let's not shy away from the fact that this bit here, from there to about here, I don't think it's the best looking bike. I don't think it's the best looking bike in the super naked category. So I think if you can ignore the looks on the side stand, once you're sat on the thing, the view that you've got, aside from it being very commanding and, you know, helps you see over the top of cars in town and all that stuff, the view that you've got is actually a pretty good one. Fairly bulbous tank. You know, you can tuck your knees up in underneath it when you're trying to go fast on the road and on track. I think I'm trying to say it in a really polite way. Once you're on it, you can't see the bit that you can see when you're not on it, this bit. So underneath that big tank is the motor. Efficiency is the key word that the guys from Kawasaki kept hitting home with it. It's incredibly efficient. Everything from the cooling system, bearing in mind the supercharger that's bolted to this bike is an in-house system. It's been designed at KHI. It's not an off-the-shelf one that they've brought in from some aftermarket tuner, so they absolutely excel at making all the parts in this motor work well with each other. So there's no need for a separate intercooler system, so weight is kept down. Pistons are forged, weight is kept down. The coolant system is as small as it needs to be while dealing with the stresses of keeping this motor cool. So there's oil jets that squirt oil onto the hottest parts of the engine when it's doing the hardest and most amount of its work. Airflow has been optimized for the supercharger. There's a slightly asymmetric design to the front of this bike. It looks like it should have two big air ducts feeding in around the sides of the headlight. One is blanked off and the other is the air feed for the supercharger. It's a cool looking system. That system extends into the supercharger itself. Again, lessons that Kawasaki has learned internally using their turbine experience and supercharger experience across all of KHI products, coupled with the experience that they've got from H2, H2R and now H2SX, mean that the supercharger design for this bike is pretty much the same as the one that you see in the SX. So it has 6 blades at the top of the supercharger, if you can imagine that being a screw type, and then 12 blades at the bottom. Efficiency, I don't want to keep banging on that word, it sounds a little bit like marketing drivel, but it is a super efficient system. One thing you may have noticed that differs between other supercharged models in the Kawasaki lineup is the double-sided swing arm. Both H2SX X and the regular H2 have the single-sided. The reason why I thought was down to the different kinds of stresses that a bike like this would have to cope with, what with the rider being in a completely different position on a naked bike compared to a sports style bike. But it's not so much to do with that. I spoke to Ito-san, the project leader for this entire bike, and what he said was, this bike has two jobs to do. It needs to sit in the H2 category, but it also needs to sit at the top of the Z trees. And the familiarity that it needs in order to be a Z means that it has this Sugomi styling that you're familiar with from Z900 and other launches where we've discussed that. But also it needs to look like a Z. So that means double-sided swing arm. So after all of the work that Kawasaki have done, the figures that it plops out at the other end are mighty, mighty impressive. 200 horsepower at 11,000 RPM and 139 Newton meters of torque at 8,500 RPM. The all-up weight of this bike ready to ride is 239 kilos. And if you're still looking at these sunglasses and laughing, trust me, behind them, I feel like a massive, massive bulb. So Kawasaki has added another axis to its Bosch IMU. They're calling it 6 degrees of freedom. Sounds a little bit like marketing soup to me. Effectively, what they've done is made the riding process as safe as it can possibly be while still painting a smile on your face. So this 2-day press launch that I've been on started on track yesterday. We did laps of the NASCAR circuit, full Ricky Bobby moments, absolutely wanging around there going as fast as we can. We also spent a couple of sessions on like a closed roads circuit. I wouldn't call it a racetrack. It was more of it wasn't a racetrack, but it was somewhere where you could try and get your knee down with painted apexes. What was apparent to me almost immediately is because of the upright riding position that you're in on a naked bike compared to just channeling some weight over the front on SX or a regular H2, it's this constant feeling that the bike is trying to wheelie. So if you're coming out of a corner in first or second gear and you absolutely give it the berries, the front starts to go light, and then you can tell almost immediately that there are degrees of electronic assistance that are aiding you in being efficient with your acceleration. I know lots of people out there still do this thing, they like to think they can turn traction control off and be the masters of their own destiny. Well, I can tell you with first-hand experience, I tried to be the master of my own destiny on the Fireblade launch last week, and there's a reason why I'm wearing my old leathers, and it's not because I'm awesome at wheelies. So if you leave these systems on and work with them rather than argue with them, you'll find that you're getting stacks of acceleration, but the wheelie control system is managing front wheel lift. When you put it down and you load the brakes up and you tip in for an apex, there's a cornering control, kind of cornering traction control. There's ABS. When you get from apex and you're riding to the exit, there's cornering traction control as well. Don't fight these systems, accept that they're here, make the most of them, and you'll enjoy a bonkers fast ride. I'm doing 159 miles an hour or whatever it was yesterday on a naked bike, and there's nothing to hide behind here. Well, there's nothing to hide behind here. 160 mile an hour naked bike experience. It's ridiculous. The way that it charges from second to third, you would think is probably one of the fastest accelerating experiences you could ever have. Until you go from full gas in third to fourth, it just absolutely rips. It's like nothing else. It's going to have its work cut out in this kind of razor sharp super naked category that it's got, you know, Super Duke Rs, Street Fighter Panigales, S1000Rs, MT10s, Speed Triples. It's a busy and bustling sector of the market, and everybody needs to have something unique in order to perform within it. Trust me, get on one of these things, go from second to fourth, absolutely wound to the stop, and you'll see exactly how unique ZH2 is. It's not just about the acceleration though. I think I'm going to echo a point that Chris made on the Super Duke launch a couple of weeks ago. The thing that makes this bike great to me is the same thing that makes Super Duke great to Chris, and it's the fact that it didn't used to be a ZX10. There are bikes in the super naked category that started off with full fairing, clip-ons, you know, feet up, tucked under your ass, and basically manufacturers are chucking those bits away, putting some flat bars on the thing and trying to refine a super sports machine or an out-and-out sports bike into a naked one. This isn't one of those bikes. It's never been anything other than exactly what it is, and I quite like that. I like there's almost a GT feel to this bike. It's comfortable, you can cruise around on it. The speed limit on this amazing road here is about 12 miles an hour, and they enforce it with drones and F16s and lasers and all kinds of stuff. You can't break the speed limit around here. So what we've been doing is sticking them in 5th or 6th and just rolling along. The torque is creamy smooth at the bottom. There's drive everywhere. And if none of these Kawasaki grown-ups that are behind the camera are watching, you'd be banging through here on the stop in 2nd gear, making loads of noise and, you know, going as fast as you can. You just can't do that around here. I'm grateful knowing that where I live in London, there's not as much chance to go fast as you think. So my day-to-day ride would also be similar to the kind of riding we're doing here today. It doesn't just demand to be thrashed. It can do absolutely everything in between. So granted, we were on a track yesterday morning, but it was absolutely freezing cold. There's icicles hanging out of the outside tap at the back of the pits and all that kind of thing. So it wasn't an opportunity to immediately go out, bang loads of heat into those tyres and start smashing knee down everywhere. If anything, it was quite the opposite. Same as today. It was only 4 or 5 degrees before lunchtime. So while it may look amazing on screen, the reality is behind my visor, I'm trying to manage with tyres that just don't really carry any heat. It's no fault of the tyre, it is what it is. It's freezing cold over here at the minute. Again, it was a chance to highlight the usability and kind of tractability of the motor when it's coupled to a reasonable tyre, fantastic traction control and rider software. Everything comes together to help you enjoy your ride. If you think back to a couple of years ago, let's say maybe 5 or 10 years ago, when traction control first came on the scene, it was quite an agricultural thing. You know, you could feel it bouncing your balls off the tank every time the traction came in. The ABS would push you miles offline when you tried to get on top of them. Those systems aren't like that anymore. They've been refined over time and you can enjoy using them now. You can ride a bike with them rather than fighting against them. If you're sat at home watching this and you're Billy Big Balls and you think you've got the better of all the rider controls and traction control systems out there, defy you to get on a bike like this on a day like yesterday and not spit yourself to the moon. Again, I've done that in the last week. I'm speaking from experience. So one thing that I would change with this bike is the exhaust. Kawasaki, the kings of making airboxes sound amazing. This Supercharger does that weird fluttery thing that the other H2s that I've ridden do. But I think there's something about this naked bike that would just suit a loud and leery exhaust pipe that would piss the neighbours off more than the SX does. The riding experience is incredible, not just because of the amount of power it produces and how it produces that power, but just the fact that it is an incredibly capable naked machine. I think if we look across the supercharged range, H2R, king of the table, absolutely, you know, top of the food chain. Ditto the SX. I don't think there's a bike that can really compete in that kind of super fast sports touring market. This one, like I said earlier, it has its work cut out. There are stacks of machines that sit in this sector that might grab your attention more than this does. But as I say in every other single review that I've done, the test ride will tell the story for you. I spent a couple of days on it. I've kind of fallen in love with it. If you look back through my Twitter feed, you'll see me laughing at this bit here a couple of months ago. I can absolutely forgive that for what it does when you put that there and hide behind the nothingness that is naked motorcycling.
I think I need to be sick. That is f***ing amazing.